Hi, everyone. Welcome back to those of you who are here with us in Paris, and many of you, I saw how many people are attending online. A bit
Et
nerve-wracking, but
voilà,
glad to
donc
have you with us.
on est
We are
content
back to the topic of
d'être de retour.
day
C'est un
one,
petit
and we're
peu
going to jump right into
difficile
a
pour les
session
nerfs quand même de faire tout ça à
about
distance, mais on
research,
va tout
about
de suite
new
passer
ideas
au
and
professeur
innovation,
John Lys sur
and
des
how
nouvelles
behavioral
idées, de
science
nouvelles
play a role in
innovations et
bringing new
comment
ideas into
les
the field
neurosciences
and
peuvent
help us
aider à
assess
générer de
how
nouvelles
people
idées
adopt new ideas in the
et
field.
comment
That'll
faire
be the
adopter
kickoff of
ces
our
idées,
session
ces
this
innovations. Donc
afternoon,
ça, c'est le
and we'll
kick-off
see you after this
de la
program
session de cet
shortly.
après-midi et on vous revoit après cette conversation, après John Lys. À tout à l'heure.
Welcome everybody to the second half of our first day here at the Human Advantage Conference. As we open the afternoon session, we are discussing new ideas, new product and innovation. For this session, I am going to leave most of the questioning to my colleague Ted Utoff. Ted is our Global Chief Officer at BVNH Consulting. But I do want to briefly, if possible, introduce our guest speaker for this session, Professor John A. List. John is a Kenneth C. Griffin Distinguished Service Professor in Economics at the University of Chicago, a Distinguished Professor of Economics at the Australian National University, as well as previously serving as a Chief Economist at both Lyft and previously Uber, and now at Walmart. John has served on the Council of Economic Advisor and is a recipient of numerous awards. I told you that it would be quite long, and honors, including the Galbraith Award. John has authored over 250 peer-reviewed journal articles and a number of books, including with Uri Gnizzi, the best-selling The White Axis, and this year's bestseller, The Voltage Effect, How to Make Good Ideas Great and Great Ideas Scale. Welcome, John. A big thanks for being with us. We are really very excited and happy to have you here with us on day one of the Human Advantage. Welcome, John.
Eric, thank you so much. And it's great to see both you and Ted again. Thanks for having me, and thanks so much for spreading the scientific word. You're doing great work, and keep it up. And I'm just so glad to be here.
It is good to see you again, John. I trust we can put our upper Midwest rivalry behind us for the sake of the audience and carry on.
We're like a modern day Sharks versus the Jets,
I
right?
think so. This kind of Mississippi River border, yeah. As Eric mentioned, we're headed into this afternoon session thinking about new ideas, new products. Previously this might have been solely under the domain of innovation consultancies or design thinking. But increasingly there is interest in involving a behavioral point of view. In your eyes, John, what does behavioral science bring to the game? Or maybe I should say, how can behavioral science help organizations think about and develop new services or products?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one way to think about this is that we could talk about behavioral entrepreneurship, which is really how behavioral science and entrepreneurship can come together in a very important area of study. Now, when you think about entrepreneurship, you could think about, does behavioral science give us insights anywhere in the channel of entrepreneurship? And I would say yes, yes, and yes. It actually gives us insights in every area. Well, I would say from soup to nuts. So let's think about what that means. The very beginning of entrepreneurship starts with an idea. And you have to think about what are the best ways to generate evidence to figure out if my idea is worthwhile. And right away, you're confronted with what behavioral scientists call confirmation bias. If we have an idea, we generate evidence, and we generate it, one, in a way that favors our approach or our idea. And then when we get the actual data, we view it in a light that has confirmation bias. If it's in our favor, we say, voila, I have the evidence. And if it's against us, we say, probably an outlier, probably a false positive. there's a flaw in the way that we generated the data, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the beginning of entrepreneurship. But then after we launch, you can think about execution. And behavioral science, of course, comes up in every facet of execution. Think about incentives. Behavioral scientists have generated a lot of insights along the lines of worker incentives, or at Walmart, what we would call associate incentives. You could think about incentives on the consumer side. What are the best ways to think about pricing or the value proposition? This is all behavioral science. So now, as you can see, behavioral science is really soup to nuts. And when we have an idea, it will have a place at every point in the chain.
Great. And many new products and services are launched within the market every year, but not all succeed. In fact, most fail. Any thoughts on why that might be the case, and or if how a deeper understanding of behavioral science might prevent failure or improve rates of success?
Yeah. So ideas fail for two primary reasons. One is the idea never had a chance. And the idea never had a chance to scale, which I know we'll talk about in some time. So think about in the 90s, the McDonald's CEO had an idea called the Arch Deluxe. And his idea was, this Arch Deluxe is a great sandwich, so I want to introduce it to the market. But he said, I want to generate evidence before introduction, before I spend a bunch of money in scaling it and generalizing it to all the stores. I want some evidence to show that the Arch Deluxe is a good sandwich. So what did he do? He basically did what everyone does. He brought in a focus group. Okay, so what's the issue here? First of all, the people who agree to come into the lab to eat McDonald's burgers are probably burger lovers or McDonald's lovers. So there's a selection problem in doing this, and you need to adjust your data for that selection and make sure you don't fall prey to confirmation bias. The second reason is a very behavioral sciencey description of what happens in surveys. So think about this particular survey. You try a bite of the sandwich and you say, oh, it's okay. But the survey says, if it's introduced, would you pay $3.50 for it? You're like, okay. Now, the reason why you say yes is because you are buying a free option. Think about the stock market. We all the time buy options, call options, and that gives us the right to purchase a stock, for example, in the future at a specified price. We have to pay for that. And we pay for that because the option is important. In the survey case, there's no cost. And the benefit is there might be something introduced in the future that I might like. And if I like it, I get to consume it. So if you ask me, will you pay $3.50? Sure. Will you pay $4.50? Sure. Will you pay $5.50? Sure. We have to understand that there are behavioral incentives underlying focus groups. And a lot of times, if you don't adjust for it, for what I'm talking about here, both the selection effect and the behavioral effect, we're going to have false signals. So now that's very important. That's what I, again, would call ideas fail because they should have never been introduced to begin with. Now, in the second camp, you have ideas that should have been introduced, but people just don't execute. And they don't execute because of simple behavioral or economic reasons. Like, think about optimal quitting. We don't quit enough. And the fact that we don't quit enough is because of both society telling us we shouldn't quit, right? You know from the upper Midwest, the greatest football coach ever, right? Vince Lombardi. And don't say
we said we were going to get along today.
Chad, if you say some old Viking coach and you just start talking about Fran Tarkenton, I know you're off the deep end, because when it comes to football, you just need to look at the Super Bowl trophy. It says the Lombardi Trophy. Okay, so I know you're thinking about Bud Grant and all the Super Bowls that Bud Grant lost in the late 70s, but let's get back to business here, Ted. So So when you think about quitting, society tells us quitting is bad, and you can just look at inspirational posters about why we shouldn't quit. But the other one's a very behavioral sciencey reason why we don't quit, and that's because we neglect the opportunity cost of time. And entrepreneurs who have a good idea and they introduce it, if they don't understand that pivoting is okay, quitting that idea and pivoting should be a very useful thing to always think about and always do. And that decision will depend on opportunity cost. And opportunity cost, what I mean by that is as you mentioned, Eric said, John was at Lyft as a chief economist, and he just moved to Walmart. The reason why I moved was not because anything was wrong with Lyft. I love Lyft. It was because my opportunity set got better. And when your opportunity set gets better, that means your opportunity cost of staying at Lyft gets higher. And if it gets too high, you rotate or you pivot or you quit. So I quit Lyft and I moved to Walmart. So there are these aspects both within should you ever have scaled it or introduced it, and then secondly, are you executing? And I think those are really the features of the, let's say, most enterprise value and most enterprise decisions are based in those two buckets.
I think, John, you're preaching to the converted for Eric and I, people who spent the previous part of our careers in market research before becoming applied behavioral scientists, and that's really been, Eric's life work building the previous agency he had, and much of my work is this idea of how do you take a practice that so many clients are bought into, which is market research, but how do you do it, A, with behavioral science in mind, but B, also trying to test in context. So to your point, not purchase intent, but actual purchase, or making decisions in the context that they're made. What I would say, and what I think Eric and I have found, is that making that shift with clients has taken a very long time because they're benchmarking off of data they already have, or that they believe straight from the horse's mouth, excuse the pun, that consumers can rationalize and can communicate their future behavior. And that I think we're getting there, but that has been a real battle, I would say, for our colleagues in the market research world.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't doubt that consumers can do a reasonable job trying to forecast or saying, here's what I like right now. But we have to understand, do they want to tell you the truth, or is there an incentive that will lead them to say, I'm going to overstate my preferences? We see this all the time in contingent valuation. Yeah, in contingent valuation, we see this all the time. That's a survey-based approach to measure the non-marketed value of goods and services. And there's an incentive to do that. In the focus groups, there's an incentive. And we have developed ways to overcome or attenuate those biases through behavioral science. And I'm saying keep doing focus groups, but understand they have two major flaws. One's selection and one's behavioral. And you should do everything you can to address those. Otherwise, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is the exact same thing that happened to the McDonald's CEO. He took those data and he said, oh, look, everyone loves the Arch Deluxe. He introduced it. It was a massive failure. He lost his job because he spent so much in terms of resources and time and introduced a product that failed that he got fired. And it was perfectly avoidable had he had a little bit of, there's a selection issue here and a behavioral issue, and we should at least address it before we start to run and introduce this product.
We opened the Human Advantage event this morning with a discussion with Cass Sunstein, as you know, and we came across this quote from Cass about you, and I quote, "Lyft has done more than anyone else to advance the methods and practice of field experiments." So as our resident expert in field experiments and coming off what we've just been talking about, I want to press you here a little bit. As we often say at BVA Nudge Consulting to our clients, behavioral science is science, so we should be testing. And while I think our clients agree in principle, the realities of many of their businesses is that there simply isn't time to conduct a kind of proper randomized control trial, or the pace of their business can't wait, or the budgets just don't allow. So any pointers for experimenting in the field with that kind of business mindset or that business cap on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first of all, that's very generous of Cass. I appreciate that. I do have pride in priority, so it's nice. I think you've pinpointed the two major obstacles that I have learned about through my work with organizations, whether it's a governmental organization, a nonprofit, or a for-profit. It's kind of two obstacles that go along the lines of, one, we don't have time for that. And two, it's just too expensive. It will cost resources. Beyond time, it will cost real resources that we just don't have. Let's take those on one by one. So the first one, it's really never made sense to me that if you are going to introduce an idea or product, why not do it in a way that you can examine if it's working or if your approach is working? You're going to introduce it anyway. Okay, at Uber, we have a new product. Let's introduce it in a staggered fashion. We want to introduce it maybe in Seattle, maybe in Chicago, maybe in Atlanta first. That's what we did with tipping. We introduced it in a staggered way that would allow us to examine what have been the effects of tipping. If we would have done it all at once, first of all, it doesn't make sense most of the time to do it all at once because you're going to have bugs. It's harder to do it because it's so many resources at once. It just seems optimal to me to do it in a staggered type of approach anyway, or hold some people back. That's what you need to do to use science to test. In the Uber case, does tipping raise wages? Do consumers like tips, the ability to give a tip? Does service quality improve because of tipping? These are all important questions around tipping that we answered because we introduced tipping in a staggered way. That's science. That's generating data empirically, experimentally to learn. Okay, so now we've dispatched number one. Makes no sense to say we don't have time. That's dumb. It allows you to run faster, let's be honest. Number two, people say it costs money. And sometimes it does cost money. You have to bring in a person to design the experiment, try to do it fast in a staggered way. You might have to use incentives. You might have to do it maybe in a way that is a little bit of resource cost. But let's be honest, the true cost here is the opportunity cost of not knowing what works and why. And when you don't generate data, and you don't figure out what customers want or if our approach is better than an alternative approach, every day you live by not knowing what's optimal, that's a huge opportunity cost of time. So I can give you all kinds of examples from Lyft around pricing or other means that if we wouldn't have tested a new approach, we would have just kept the status quo, not knowing that there was a better means. That's an opportunity cost of time, because every day that goes by and you're not acting in an optimal way, that's the true cost here. It's not the small resource cost outlays that are happening to scratch off 3 lottery tickets. I mean, think of it that way. You're scratching off 3 lottery tickets, 1 or 2 of them are probably going to hit because there's a lot of behavioral science that's behind a lot of these innovations, and they've been found in other settings. And then the one that works, you implement. And now your organization is a lot better from that day going forward. And the benefits are accruing through time, right? Now you have this flow, this integral over time of great benefits that you would have been without because there's a huge opportunity cost of not knowing. So in that way, the second argument just doesn't hold for a rational firm. It's the opportunity cost of not knowing. That's the true cost here, not the small resource outlays.
Okay. So naturally, part of assessing whether an innovation or a new product or service is worth pursuing is about understanding scalability. Scalability, of course, focus of your latest book, The Voltage Effect. Can you share with our audience how you came to this theme of scalability and maybe share with them some lessons from the business world? And I'm going to push you a little bit here, John. You've talked about Lyft and Uber as a service provider, but some of our clients, would be, or some of our attendees would also be in the world of products, where
Sure.
I think that cost outlay, I'm going to push you, is a little bit more intense.
I think that's crazy. I mean, look, I work for Walmart. That's product, right? Yeah, I have the exact same examples I can say at Walmart, where we're moving product and giving people a chance for free delivery or Walmart Plus or employee benefits, et cetera. It's the same. Incentives are the same. But let's now go first to your question. Look, I started, as I told you both the last time we talked, I started a preschool in 2010. And the preschool was really successful in improving kids in Chicago Heights, which is an underserved community, kids that are 3, 4, and 5. And the curriculum in school worked. Then I tried to scale it. And I started talking to policymakers about, let's get this curriculum to every kid in the world. And they told me, you're on a fool's errand, basically, because even though it looked great in Chicago Heights in the Petri dish, it's never going to scale. It's never going to work as well as what it did in Chicago Heights. So at that moment, I started to think about this kind of feature of scaling and how it's been part of my life for a long time. And I went back to 20 years ago when I worked in the White House. We had ideas, and the common theme was, will it scale? It works in New Jersey, will it go to Minneapolis? It worked in Minneapolis, will it go to Newark or wherever? When I looked around Uber and thought about the innovation that was happening at Uber, it was also, will it scale? So I started to write academic papers about scaling and scalability, because back then, this is around 2014, 2015. So I started doing academic work. And at that moment, it was a lot of art. It was move fast and break things. Basically, that was the genesis of your last question. Throw spaghetti against the wall, whatever sticks, cook it, or fake it till you make it, right? That's literally what people in the business world always say. That's art. That's simply art. There's no evidence for any of that being true. So I thought, let's add some science to the art. And my science is behavioral science, it's economics. And it's adding scientific thinking to elements like, will it scale? So then when I start to think about the firms that I've worked with, let's talk about product firms, Sears and Kmart. Didn't work out for them, but that was like predictable that it wasn't going to work. But what I write about in the book is as applicable for them as it is for a restaurant, as it is for a service provider, as it is for Walmart, Citibank, any firm you think of, or a government or a nonprofit. There are features of ideas that put them in the camp of, it's got a shot. It's got a shot to scale. And there are other features that if you don't have them, got no shot. Or at least if you scale it, the tent's going to be a lot smaller than what you probably think. So I think that's what led me to write the book. Now, so I write these academic papers and I get the sense of nobody's reading them. So my guess is, Eric and Ted, neither of you have read one of my academic papers on scaling.
Maybe a highlight or two.
You may have read the abstract if somebody told you about the abstract. That's the issue, right? Now that's the issue. Look, I love being an academic. I love science. But the issue is there are so many great secrets and so many great insights that are locked in economic, social science, hard science journals, academic journals. They're locked. And unless people like yourselves, or in my case, a few times I've said, look, I'm going to lay stake here and I'm going to write what I've learned in the academic literature on scaling. I'm going to write a popular book because I want people to learn about these ideas. It's the same thing I did with the y-axis. With the y-axis, it was along the lines of, I've been doing field experiments for 20 years. I want to let the world know why field experiments are important. In this particular case, when you think about implementation or you think about scaling, it's the most important feature we have today to change the world. Because we have a lot of good ideas that have been solved in the Petri dish. A lot of great Petri dish ideas. But those ideas don't have a shot to scale. And we don't have ideas that can scale because in the academic community, in the scientific creation, knowledge creation market, we don't have the incentives set up yet to have people test, will that idea scale? But I hope my book, in part, which takes kind of the economies out of the academic journals, takes the math out, and now is getting some attention that the academic papers wouldn't have gotten. So that's really why I wrote the book.
Well, let's stay with that, John. So in The Voltage Effect, and now I'm quoting you, you say every scalable idea is the same, every unscalable idea is unscalable in its own way. Can you tell us more about this? And perhaps as a kind of handy tip with our attendees kind of in mind, what could they look out for indications of what might be scalable or some kind of red flags to signal unscalable?
Yeah, okay, that's very good. So you have just channeled my inner Tolstoy. So okay, right. I know that this. I know for you, not being from Wisconsin, that this is high level stuff. But let me bring you home here. Bring you to Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. So you have this little kid in the mid '80s. John List is sitting, reading Anna Karenina. So Anna Karenina, I think, has one of my favorite lines of all time. It's for sure the best opening line in a novel ever written. So Tolstoy says, happy families are all alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. You're like, okay. But what have I really learned from this? Because Tolstoy has what an economist would call a dimensionality problem. Because look, I have 8 kids, and there are an infinite number of ways that my family is unhappy, right? And so Tolstoy doesn't really get us anywhere.
Sounds like a lot of ways things can go wrong. Yeah.
Exactly. Like too many ways, right? There's so many ways that you don't learn. It's like disequilibrium analysis in economics. Okay, so now let's come to scaling. So you're right. What I say is scalable ideas are all alike. Each unscalable idea is unscalable in its own way. But I pinpoint 5 reasons why ideas don't scale. And that's what I call the 5 vital signs. So if you think about ideas or entrepreneurship in like the 2 buckets that I was thinking about, first of all, do I have an idea that can scale? Those are the 5 vital signs. I talked there about false positives. I talk about understanding the extent of market. I talk about, is your evidence of its efficacy in a situation that is representative of the situation you're going to face at scale? Something that the 2 of you talk about all the time is, can we generalize from one setting to another? So in the Chicago Heights example, I only had to hire 30 teachers, but at scale, I might have to hire 30,000. If teachers are the important element back here in the Petri dish, did I test my idea for the types of teachers that I'm going to have to hire at scale? No, we don't. What we do is we hire 30 really good teachers to give our idea its best shot. That's not a test of scale. That's a test of Petri dish efficacy. Okay? So that's the 3rd vital sign, is make sure that your non-negotiables, the features that make your idea work, make sure they're available at scale. The fourth vital sign is understand spillovers. So this is in the behavioral scientists' quiver over and over again, that we move somebody, we give them an incentive, and they react to that incentive, but sometimes there's a behavioral rebound effect. In economics a long time ago, it's called the Peltzman effect. People wearing seatbelts drive more aggressively, so they undo some of the seatbelt effect. Now, you also have unintended consequences, spillovers, a new equilibria, if you will, so market-wide spillovers. So I talk a lot about the different kinds of spillovers that ideas have. On the positive side, you can think about Facebook. Network externalities. Facebook didn't look very good in the small, right? If none of your friends are on Facebook or family, it's not very valuable to you. But as more and more people pick up Facebook, it has this great feature called network externalities. And the value of Facebook grows as more people join. So that's something that in the Petri dish may not have looked great. But if you understood, once you have adoption, now you're going to have these great features, and we're going to have high voltage at scale. So that tells you want to give a lot of incentives to get people to adopt and be early adopters and spread the word. So that's vital sign number 4, is understanding spillovers. And vital sign number 5 is the supply side. So your business audience is going to know this, and they'll probably say, what took John so long to get here? Because when I talk to business types, they usually start with the supply side. And they start with the supply side for good reason, because they say, look, if this has good features, supply side features, economies of scale, that's good because I know I'm going to have to go down the demand curve eventually. And that when I go down the demand curve, people have a lower willingness to pay. So I need to be picking up cost advantages. And when I pick up cost advantages, that might serve as a market barrier, a barrier to entry. Because if I get to the bottom of my long run average total cost curve, I'm going to be killing it. Think about Amazon or Walmart. They have a lot of volume and a lot of different products, and that helps them get a lower cost per unit versus a new entrant who might just be starting up as a grocer or as a general merchandiser. So these aspects are important as well. Does the feature of your idea serve yourself well on the supply side? So that's really the first half of the voltage effect, is figuring out, does your idea have these 5 vital signs? If it doesn't, it's okay. You might still want to scale it, but just understand that the tent isn't going to be as big as it could be unless you address one of those flaws. So the notion is, okay, let's just say that it's extent of market. It's a really tiny piece of the pie I can get. It's time to think about product differentiation or some features where you can get a bigger piece of the pie. And a lot of times, like I mentioned, people overestimate the size of the pie or the available market because of things like confirmation bias and what happened to the McDonald's CEO.
So I want to ask you one more question, John, before I hand it back to Eric. And I asked something very similar of Cass in this morning session as well. With our audience in mind, many of whom are passionate about behavioral science and nudging, but working in a corporate or commercial organizations where there may not yet be a specific budget or team for applying behavioral science. How would you encourage them to make those early moves of incorporating or applying behavioral science in their work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's a hard question. The way that I've thought about it in my orgs is I've really gone to the roots, and I've thought about critical thinking. And what I mean by that is, at Lyft, the way I managed, and at Uber, the way I managed, is I tried to give my team good critical thinking skills. So I developed a playbook. Now you might say, well, how does John define critical thinking? Because critical thinking is like culture and like creativity. If you ask 30 people, you'll get 25 different definitions. Okay, so I think about critical thinking in 2 ways. One, an abstract formulation of theory of mind and getting beyond egocentrism. That's one part of critical thinking. The other part is being an empiricist and understanding how to generate data and interpret data and make inference from data. So I develop a little playbook for my workers to be systematic critical thinkers, because within critical thinking will be behavioral science. The behavioral science really is how do people behave. Right? It's positive economics, if you will. Now, you might say, well, John, this sounds like a secret book. I actually took that to the classroom, and I wrote a paper that's titled Getting Fast Thinkers to Slow Down. And then I develop a critical thinking hierarchy in that paper. So all of your listeners could go and get this paper for free. If you type in John List, Getting Fast Thinkers to Slow Down, you'll see my critical thinking hierarchy. And it goes from like the modal thinker to the neophyte to adapt and great thinker. And I talk about ways that we can teach our employees how to go up the critical thinking pyramid. Now you can say, well, how does that have to do with behavioral science? Because as you develop critical thinking skills, an important feature of that is behavioral science, because it's putting yourself in the shoes of others and figuring out how are they thinking about the problem? What are their behavioral heuristics? And how, when we have a certain kind of incentive, how do they respond and why? And when you start to think like that, you develop a totally different culture around using behavioral science. And then from that, you say, look, let's try this nudge. And if you try this nudge, whether it's a social norm nudge, a framing nudge like loss aversion or default or whatever, to sell that, you say, look, that's just part of the nexus of critical thinking. And what we've learned in the critical thinking hierarchy is why we should do those nudges. Now, a lot of people will jump right to the nudge and say, just do a simple nudge and show how valuable it is. Show them how important defaults are and show them how people will save more or work more with the default. I found that when you teach a person to fish, rather than just give them fish, even after you leave, they will continue fishing. And I think it's a fundamental cultural change about the way we think through problems in both a behavioral science or critical thinking realm and also a data is our DNA realm. Data is our DNA, so we're going to always generate data because that's our culture. At Uber and Lyft, that was the culture. If you had an idea or argument, you brought data. If you didn't bring data, don't come. And firms need to get used to that you bring behavioral science. Behavioral science helps you generate data, and then together they lead to better decisions. And that's
right where I think we are with the industry, is that, if the first 10 years, let's say, of kind of commercial application of behavioral science has been getting people's attention through nudges, where we need to be careful now is that clients say, bring me the nudges, instead of saying, let's get your team, let's get elements of your business to think about behavioral science and all that means, understanding context, understanding heuristics, understanding biases. The nudges are the great output potentially, but there's some heavy lifting to do, I think, as an industry. Eric, I need to pass it back to you.
So thanks so much, John. I was sure it would be an amazing conversation. Thank you, Ted, too, for the good question. It was really fantastic. Maybe a final question from my side. What is the one piece of advice you would give to Chief Innovation Officer who would like to start applying behavioral science to their work?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the last question and say that's the long-term investment. That's the planting of a seed that might grow into a great oak tree. Now in the short run, we need wins. I always think about when I start working with an organization, I want to use your existing data. And I want to use your existing data to show you how we can get short-term wins and small wins to show you that you should trust me. Now, I do that as a chief economist. I say, okay, what data do we have lying around that I can analyze better than anyone else can, and I can bring behavioral insights that nobody else has? We all have unique behavioral insights. So I would say start with the small win, and then you do want to build up the muscle. And when I walked in Uber for the first time, I'll never forget the sign that I saw on the pillar. Data is our DNA. And a lot of firms have slogans. And the slogans are just jargon or things that make people feel good. That wasn't the case at Uber. Data is literally your DNA. And these small wins for the chief innovation officer, the chief economist, whoever is pushing behavioral science in the firm, these small wins lead up to this overarching culture of behavioral science and data. Those are our DNA. And then that is what will stick with a firm. Right now, there's a big dichotomy between old and young. And what I see with newer firms, whether it's Scale AI, Amazon, Uber, Lyft, Facebook, Google, data is the DNA. Behavioral science is the DNA. Behavioral science is a driver. The older firms, I think it's adapt or die. I think many firms are on the endangered species list because they're not adapting to the new world of data. Now, a lot of times here, people say data is the world's greatest resource. It's not. It's the data refiners. It's people who can refine the data and use behavioral science to learn about what are the lessons and what can we take from the data to make our decisions better. Everyone has data. Everyone in the world has mounds and mounds of data. I can get mounds and mounds of data this afternoon by scraping. It's the data refiners, and that's the behavioral scientists and the people who understand how to go from data to decision making. And a ton of that's behavioral science. Have good data refiners around you is what. So I'm building a team right now at Walmart, and it will work if I can hire good data refiners. So that's sort of a way to think about changing the culture. Eric, I hope that helps.
Yeah, it's a wonderful conversation. So thanks a lot again, John. We appreciate you spending your time with us and sharing your great expertise. It was really great for all of our audience.
No, thanks so much for having me, Eric and Ted. And I'll deal with you later, my friend. The Packers are coming up in a new season. No, it's true. It's always fun to banter. It's like this morning when I woke up and looked at my calendar. This was like the highlight of my day. I know I live a pretty boring life, but Ted, it was great chatting, and Eric and Ted, keep doing this. This is great stuff. And anytime you'd like me to come back, love to come back. It's always great to chat with both of you.
Great. Thanks, John. So for our attendees, stay tuned and logged in. We're headed into the next session where we're going to discuss developing new products with System 1 in mind. And later this afternoon, we'll be talking cities and mobility, fast-moving consumer goods, and more. We will see you there.
Enough of that abuse. I didn't deserve that, I feel. But anyway.
Oui, enfin bon, j'ai l'impression qu'il m'a charrié un peu trop fort. Écoute, je ne sais pas si tu ressens la même chose, mais à chaque fois que j'écoute John, à la fin, on a l'impression d'être plus intelligent. Ce type est vraiment incroyable. Il est vraiment motivant et tellement malin. Il est à la fois un universitaire et un praticien. Alors au début, disons au milieu de carrière, il était chief économiste à la Maison Blanche, donc ça va. Pas trop mal comme expérience. Alors maintenant, on va passer à notre prochaine table ronde avec de grands experts en innovation, avec Pierrick tout d'abord, Pierrick Rivière, qui est groupe leader pour l'évaluation de performance produit chez L'Oréal, Stéphane Donajgrodzki, j'espère que je l'ai bien prononcé, qui est donc Chief Behavioral Science Officer chez Kellogg's et expert dans la mise en œuvre des sciences du comportement. Et puis nous avons aussi Pius, qui est Chief Innovation Officer à Ideas42. Et donc, cette table ronde sera également animée par un grand expert, Carlos, qui va donc présenter la séance. Vous pouvez envoyer vos questions dans le chat et Carlos fera une petite sélection. À toi. Alors tout d'abord, merci d'être avec nous, soit en présentiel, soit en distanciel. Donc on va pouvoir commencer directement puisque nous avons tous nos invités. Pierrick, première question. Sur la base de votre expérience, etc., comment pensez-vous que les sciences du comportement peuvent améliorer des choses dans le cadre des produits de grande consommation? Alors d'abord, merci à l'organisation et surtout Eric et Étienne pour leur invitation. Sur votre question, ce que les sciences comportementales peuvent apporter au processus d'innovation, eh bien je dirais que il s'agit d'être plus centré sur l'utilisateur, ça aide à améliorer ça, et ça permet, particulièrement pour les innovations disruptives, parce que, et ce que j'entends par disruptive, ce sont les innovations qui font changer les rituels des consommateurs. Et dans le marché de la beauté, il y a deux grandes révolutions qui se préparent. D'abord, c'est les sciences vertes. On en a déjà parlé, hein, du sujet développement durable. Et les sciences vertes, c'est un nouveau paradigme de formulation des produits de façon plus durable. Et l'autre grande révolution, ça va être la beauty tech. Comment non seulement on pourra créer des formules, mais aussi des services qui permettront d'améliorer l'expérience client avec un smartphone ou d'autres appareils connectés. Et donc les sciences comportementales permettront une adoption durable de ces innovations ruptures. De trois façons. Tout d'abord, les sciences comportementales peuvent aider à mieux définir le défi en termes de comportement. Il est extrêmement important de fixer les bonnes ambitions pour les bons consommateurs. Si je prends l'exemple de la consommation d'eau sous la douche, comment peut-on faire baisser la consommation d'eau sous la douche? Peut-être qu'il vaut mieux le faire étape par étape que de demander aux consommateurs de le faire brutalement, même si la solution technique existe, parce que quand on travaille dans le domaine de l'innovation, il y a plein d'ingénieurs qui débordent d'idées. Ils ont les solutions, mais est-ce que ces solutions seront pertinentes pour les consommateurs? Est-ce qu'elles vont vraiment pousser les consommateurs à changer leurs habitudes, à modifier leurs habitudes? C'est pour ça qu'on est là, en fait. Et deuxième étape, comment ces sciences-là peuvent-elles aider à mieux comprendre les frictions dont on a parlé avant, les barrières potentielles à l'adoption? Et puis, ça donne aussi un prisme très clair pour mieux identifier les frictions et l'ensemble des apprentissages dans ce domaine peut aussi apporter des conseils extrêmement utiles sur la façon dont on peut concevoir une expérience client, par exemple, qui prenne vraiment en compte le système 1 et le système 2, c'est-à-dire la pensée rationnelle et la pensée irrationnelle, non rationnelle. Moi, personnellement, je travaille dans un secteur où on est plutôt tech push, mais donc on est très rationnel, mais il faut qu'on prenne mieux en compte le côté irrationnel de l'innovation. C'est pas parce que ça fonctionne objectivement ou en théorie que ça va marcher dans la vraie vie, et les sciences du comportement peuvent nous aider à avoir un point de vue plus complet de l'adoption d'une innovation par les consommateurs. Merci. Alors Piyush, moi la même question sur la science. Comment est-ce qu'on peut améliorer les processus d'innovation dans les biens de consommation? Merci. Alors moi je suis un peu d'accord avec ce qui vient d'être dit. Je suis bien content d'être là. Moi, je parlerai peut-être de quelque chose d'un peu différent. Comment fait-on pour identifier les besoins et comprendre les comportements à l'origine? On a toujours été habitué à faire des études, Des entretiens, c'est évidemment extrêmement utile, mais très souvent, les choses que vous disent ces gens sont une espèce de justification fermée, alors ils essaient de repenser à pourquoi ils ont fait telle ou telle chose, et ils essaient de vous donner la réponse qui va vous faire plaisir souvent. Et on sait, grâce aux sciences comportementales, comment identifier des besoins qui ne comptent pas seulement sur ce que les gens vont vous déclarer. Et il y a une étude que j'aime beaucoup, c'est une étude très ancienne, qui illustre cela. Donc on amène des sujets dans une salle qui voient deux cordes accrochées au mur. Et elles sont assez éloignées, donc ils ne peuvent pas attraper les deux en tendant les bras. Et donc il y a différents outils dans la salle, ils doivent faire un nœud, nouer ces deux cordes ensemble. Donc les gens ont un peu de difficulté, et puis ensuite l'animateur vient, il traverse un peu la salle, et puis il cogne une des cordes, et elle commence à se balancer. Et là, le sujet comprend quasiment immédiatement. Genre, ah bah oui, on fait un pendule avec une des cordes, elle va se balancer, et quand le mouvement de pendule la rapproche, hop, ils peuvent attraper les deux cordes et les nouer ensemble. Mais si vous demandez aux gens comment ils ont résolu le problème, ils vous racontent tout un tas d'histoires. Ils vous disent, ah oui, je me suis souvenu d'un pendule, de cette vieille horloge avec un pendule qui m'a fait penser à ça. Et en fait, il y a très peu de gens qui disent, ah bah c'est parce que vous êtes passé là et que vous avez fait balancer la corde. Donc, c'est un point important du processus. Comme il a été dit d'ailleurs, on ne peut pas toujours compter sur ce que les gens vous disent. Il faut tester aussi, on peut faire des tests en labo, on peut avoir des insights sur un besoin qui viennent de tout à fait autre chose. J'adore par exemple cet exemple des petits sachets de shampoing vendus tout en bas de la pyramide. Parce que les gens n'ont pas beaucoup d'argent, et ça c'est venu de recherches qui a été faite sur les produits financiers et tout ça. Donc il faut regarder plus largement pour obtenir des indications de ce genre.
Thank you. So now, Stephen.
Super, merci. Steven? Oui, merci pour l'invitation. Je suis d'accord avec ce qu'ont dit les autres. Il y a toutes sortes de choses que les sciences du comportement peuvent nous aider à faire. Alors d'abord, quelle est l'éthique de tout cela? Il faut devenir s'intéresser plus aux clients, le mettre au centre, mieux savoir ce dont ils ont envie et ce dont ils ont besoin. Deuxième point, évidemment, la recherche de meilleures techniques d'études pour mieux comprendre les gens. Comment ils utilisent les produits, ce qu'ils en font, pourquoi ils le font, et comment vous pouvez les aider. Troisièmement, évidemment, le design, la conception des produits. On n'a pas beaucoup parlé de ça pour l'instant, mais je crois qu'il est très important de comprendre toutes les différentes choses que l'on met sur le packaging et comment le packaging fonctionne. Parce qu'il n'y a pas juste le produit, il n'y a pas juste le côté offre. Il faut bien comprendre et envisager les choses dans leur ensemble. Et puis, il faut différentes méthodes pour y arriver. Quatrième point, comment est-ce qu'on fait pour évaluer toutes ces choses-là? Les sciences du comportement ont été extrêmement utiles pour réfléchir à ces points-là. Et puis, dernièrement, je crois que tout le monde en a déjà un peu parlé, et c'est très important, c'est le côté changement interne. Quand on travaille avec des ingénieurs, des scientifiques, tout le monde a envie, souhaite une approche rationnelle, avoir une approche rationnelle. Et il est intéressant qu'en fait, les sciences du comportement apportent une justification rationnelle sur la façon dont les choses ne sont pas toujours comme on s'y attend. Et puis, en définitive, le plus fort impact, si l'on regarde les choses d'un point de vue interne, pour justifier les différentes façons de faire les choses, enfin disons il y a 10 ans, dans le domaine de la recherche, où les études c'était assez simple, c'était quoi, un focus group ou une étude quanti, Et bon, qu'on le faisait faire par une agence ou on le faisait soi-même. Et de comprendre que déjà ça, ce n'est pas forcément le meilleur moyen de comprendre ce que les gens veulent. Ils ne vont pas toujours vous répondre ou vouloir vous répondre. Donc, c'est important. Comprendre la façon dont les gens interagissent avec les choses, mais d'un point de vue beaucoup plus, avec une approche beaucoup plus expérimentale. Et en fait, c'est assez intéressant. Si on pense à la session précédente, il y a très souvent une question de vitesse, parce que on demande aux gens de changer d'habitude, des habitudes qu'ils ont depuis longtemps, de changer intérieurement les normes qu'ils s'appliquent à eux-mêmes depuis très longtemps. Si vous demandez aux gens, par exemple, des méthodologies classiques, ils vont dire oui, c'est facile à comprendre, mais quand on commence à pousser les gens, à les inciter à réfléchir différemment, les choses deviennent beaucoup plus difficiles. Donc si vous pensez d'un système 2, pousser d'un aspect vers l'autre, c'est toujours assez difficile. Et ça s'applique évidemment autant à l'interne qu'au consommateur. Si vous êtes en train de développer quelque chose qui est radicalement innovant, les consommateurs vont trouver ça beaucoup plus difficile que les personnes en interne. Il faut aussi aider les personnes en interne à comprendre qu'en définitive, ça va être très compliqué, pour des raisons qui ne sont pas entièrement rationnelles et qui ne sont pas entièrement les mêmes. Il y a différentes pressions et différentes motivations. Et je pense que là, c'est sans doute une des contributions très utiles des sciences du comportement, parce que si on ne peut pas gérer ces défis à l'intérieur, c'est très difficile de changer les processus. Et si on n'est pas capable de changer ses propres habitudes, c'est très difficile d'appliquer les sciences du comportement à la création, au design. Merci, ravi de savoir qu'il faut tester et tester plus et faire des études. Donc, passons à la question suivante et on revient à Piyush. Comment est-ce qu'on peut diffuser les sciences dans les organisations importantes comme les multinationales qui évidemment fonctionnent avec tout un tas de couches de complexité? Oui, c'est une question à laquelle je réfléchis depuis un certain temps. Je dirais que il faut évidemment commencer par comprendre les sciences, les insights des sciences comportementales. Mais il ne s'agit pas simplement de lire des articles scientifiques ou les best-sellers, les bouquins, parce que ça peut vous donner l'impression que les sciences comportementales vous donnent une espèce de kit de dissolution qui s'applique universellement. Et il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on trouve là, qui sont pareilles, et dire « Ah oui, bah, vous pouvez utiliser les normes sociales pour faciliter les choses ». C'est pas du tout ça. Ce que la science nous explique, si vous la lisez avec attention, c'est la façon dont il y a des éléments de la situation ou du contexte, comme on dit, comment cela peut affecter les comportements. C'est ça qu'il faut extraire des aspects scientifiques, parce que c'est ça qui le rend utile à la conception des choses ou aux affaires. Alors, on a entendu la surcharge de choix, trop de choix, tue le choix, etc. On a entendu parler de ces choses-là, mais les caractéristiques particulières sont très importantes. Et puis, il y a des circonstances dans lesquelles il va y avoir trop d'options, trop de choix. Ou alors, d'autres, il va y avoir des options peu nombreuses, mais très difficiles à comparer les unes avec les autres. Et ça va créer des problèmes dans le choix. Mais ça, il faut comprendre ce qui est en train de se passer dans le cas particulier. Est-ce que c'est l'un ou l'autre, ou est-ce que c'est les deux? Et il va falloir concevoir les choses. S'il y a trop d'options, on peut peut-être utiliser un moteur de recommandation ou une catégorisation. Si c'est difficile à comparer, peut-être changer la façon dont on présente les options pour donner des critères de comparaison à l'acheteur. Ou également des recommandations. C'est ça qu'il faut bien intégrer. Donc en fait, les deux choses qu'il faut vraiment intégrer dans un processus d'innovation, en termes de ces sciences comportementales. Il faut prendre ses connaissances scientifiques, il faut comprendre la situation avant de commencer à concevoir les choses. Il faut l'intégrer au processus. Et puis on en a parlé, tests, expérimentation, études, etc. Mais peu importe le processus auquel vous intégrez tout ça. Mais tout ça m'amène à la conclusion qu'il n'y a pas une solution miracle. Utilisez les méthodes qui conviennent à vos équipes. Il faut simplement intégrer ces deux éléments. Il faut comprendre la situation, le contexte par rapport et tester.
Thank you, Piyush. So now, Stephen,
Merci,
back to
Steven.
you, same question.
J'en reviens à vous, la même question.
Behavioral science within
Comment
large
diffuser les sciences
companies.
du comportement dans les grandes entreprises? Alors je vais peut-être un petit peu... ce que je vais dire va peut-être être un petit peu controversé, mais j'ai pas l'impression qu'il y ait vraiment besoin d'avoir tant de sciences du comportement que ça, hein, puisque c'est pas juste Kellogg's, hein, c'est toutes les grandes entreprises pour lesquelles j'ai travaillé. Souvent, on commence par une approche sur la base de les former, pour leur apprendre ce que c'est que les sciences du comportement, etc., comment on réfléchit au contexte, comment on s'en sert. Et dans différentes sociétés, et ça c'est un peu une généralisation évidemment, c'est que si on forme les gens, ils deviennent beaucoup mieux employables, et si vous ne faites pas attention, ils vont simplement démissionner et aller trouver un boulot mieux payé. Et puis après, ils finiront par venir vous remplacer. Donc en fait, qu'est-ce qu'on fait en réalité? Et quelles sont les choses importantes? On l'a dit, il faut penser au contexte, à l'environnement. Et moi, je suis tout à fait d'accord. Moi, je ne suis pas du tout dogmatique sur le processus. C'est le processus qui convient le mieux, qui marche le mieux, qui est le meilleur, forcément. Mais après qu'on puisse commencer à rajouter des étapes comportementalistes dans le processus, c'est bien. Donc pas forcément changer tout de fond en comble, mais changer le processus, avec une espèce de nudge environnemental d'une certaine façon. En parlant avec des agences comportementalistes ou des scientifiques, mais commencer à l'utiliser correctement. Et il faut changer aussi peu que possible, parce que si vous ne changez pas trop, le processus sera plus fluide. Et puis, et voilà, moi j'ai travaillé avec un certain nombre de nutritionnistes ou de spécialistes de l'alimentation. Et puis, peut-être qu'il faut s'en débarrasser et prendre des behavioristes et les former sur la nourriture ou l'alimentation. Mais vous savez, il n'y a pas besoin de tant de formation que ça. Ce dont ils ont besoin, c'est de connaître le contexte des process pour leur permettre d'utiliser d'autres ressources de façon plus efficace. Et je travaille là-dessus depuis quelques années maintenant. Je m'éloigne de l'idée qu'il faut que tout le monde soit formé dans ces matières. Mais en fait, si vous regardez le nombre de formations qui existent sur les sciences du comportement, c'est énorme. Puis après, on se dit, mais à quoi bon? Mais quand on commence à l'intégrer au processus, les gens comprennent comment ça marche et ils s'en servent. Et le plus ils s'en servent, le plus ils s'y habituent et le plus c'est intégré. Donc, disons, enfin, en tout cas, c'est ce que j'ai appris sur le terrain. Voilà, si c'est pour répondre à votre question.
Effectivement. Pierrick, je me tourne vers vous. Alors oui, effectivement, moi je suis d'accord avec ce que je viens d'entendre, de ce que j'ai pu voir chez L'Oréal, où nous avons de la chance maintenant depuis 3 ans, puisque il s'agit d'une compétence clé chez L'Oréal aujourd'hui. Pour tous les collaborateurs, nous avons la responsabilité de former l'ensemble des collaborateurs sur les sciences comportementales. ou comportementaliste. Donc, pour nous, nous en sommes encore, même aujourd'hui, qu'au balbutiement. Nous avons besoin d'un petit, et j'insiste, un petit groupe d'experts, pas trop de personnes, créer un cadre qui est conforme aux enjeux que sont les enjeux de L'Oréal. Nous n'avons pas forcément les mêmes problématiques dans toutes les entreprises. Il faut faire des tests, des proof of concept, des POC, et voir ensuite comment ces experts peuvent continuer à se former et à apprendre. Et ensuite, à leur tour, expliquer ce que c'est que la science comportementale. C'est un concept qui peut être un peu mystérieux parfois, qui est très méconnu, et il est important d'en expliquer les grands principes. L'apprentissage formel, néanmoins, ne suffit pas. Je pense que nous devons être attentifs à coacher les employés sur comment employer et appliquer ces sciences comportementales au quotidien dans leur travail. C'est ce que nous essayons de faire au quotidien. Nous essayons d'appliquer ces principes, des concepts parfois très théoriques. Par exemple, lorsque l'idée IKEA, par exemple, le concept IKEA, en fonction de chaque projet, les solutions proposées ne sont pas forcément les mêmes. Et c'est un peu la particularité des sciences comportementales, c'est une approche sur mesure. Il faut donc aller dans le détail de votre situation, de votre contexte à vous, pour voir comment le concept peut s'appliquer à votre contexte. Et c'est assez complexe. Comment s'assurer que les gens vont savoir et vouloir appliquer la théorie à leur pratique quotidienne. Et c'est pour cette raison-là que cette approche de coaching est très importante. Et c'est ce que nous faisons, c'est vraiment sur cet aspect-là que nous portons nos efforts. Très bien, tel que vous le décrivez, cela a l'air relativement simple. Alors, une dernière question, je reviens vers vous, Steven, et c'était la dernière question lors de la table ronde précédente. Quelles seraient vos recommandations pour les débutants en la matière? Comment peuvent-ils vraiment bénéficier et profiter de la science comportementale? Je dirais qu'avant de leur recommander quoi que ce soit, j'attendrai qu'ils aient travaillé un peu sur le sujet, qu'ils aient avancé un peu, afin d'avoir eux-mêmes leurs premières idées. Leur donner d'emblée des conseils ne me semble pas être la bonne idée. Par contre, ce que je recommanderais après, eh bien, c'est que l'on commence à réfléchir à tous les domaines possibles et imaginables où on va pouvoir utiliser cette science, en s'assurant, évidemment, que les domaines qui en ont le plus besoin puissent en bénéficier. Ça peut être des processus de réflexion interne, par exemple. On sait que les ateliers de travail sont souvent de très mauvaises façons finalement pour générer des idées. Donc je crois qu'il faut vraiment analyser les avantages et les inconvénients de ce qu'ils font et puis ensuite continuer le travail. Je pense qu'il faut aussi encourager chacun à apprendre et à apprendre différemment, à travailler différemment. Et toujours se poser la question de savoir comment les choses peuvent s'appliquer concrètement au quotidien. En analysant toujours la phase du design. Vous savez, appliquer des théories générales, ça ne sert à rien. Je pense qu'il faut au contraire être particulièrement spécifique et précis. L'idée n'étant pas de prendre des principes, des idées simples et les appliquer de manière générale. Je crois qu'il faut aller beaucoup plus dans le détail et toujours tester, comme je l'évoquais tout à l'heure. Tester avant de continuer. Alors, je crois que c'est ce que je ferai.
Thank you, Stephen. So now, Pierrick, also.
Merci. Alors, je pense effectivement qu'il n'y a pas de solution sur mesure ou unique. Je crois que chacun doit procéder à sa propre façon en identifiant les enjeux de l'entreprise, du groupe dans lequel on travaille. Ça, c'est un premier message important. Puis, je crois qu'il est important, il faut d'encourager l'élimination des silos. Prenons l'expérience consommateur, par exemple. Chaque personne qui participe à l'expérience du consommateur ou du client a un rôle à jouer dans le processus d'innovation. Donc, il faut éliminer les silos, que ce soit dans le marketing, dans le commercial. Les gens doivent travailler ensemble pour développer cette expérience ensemble. Et puis peut-être un dernier message, commencer aussi tôt que possible. Et ne vous dites pas, on va rajouter une petite touche de sciences comportementales à la fin pour faire bien. Non, il faut vraiment démarrer dès le début. L'idée, c'est bien de travailler sur l'expérience client, l'expérience utilisateur, avec une intention extrêmement claire, une ambition extrêmement claire dès le début. Et ceux qui ont potentiellement une partie de la solution entre leurs mains doivent bien entendu jouer un rôle. Piyush, je me tourne vers vous avec la même question. Alors, j'aime beaucoup ce que Pierrick et Stephen viennent de nous dire. Et comme l'a dit Stephen tout à l'heure, je crois qu'il est... Je crois qu'il est important de former aussi les gens sur le sujet. Je le sais très bien, personnellement. Je crois qu'il faut aussi donc prévoir de recruter du monde dans le domaine. Et de manière plus sérieuse, ce que j'ai pu observer lorsque j'ai travaillé en tant que consultant pour de grands groupes, c'est que l'échec ne fait pas partie des options. Lorsque vous faites un pilote ou un test, eh bien même dans cette configuration-là, vous devez être au final certain de réussir, ce qui n'a aucun sens. Lorsque vous faites de l'innovation, eh bien par défaut, vous allez parfois échouer. C'est comme ça. Parfois, vous ne pourrez pas réussir. Et je pense qu'il faut bien être parfaitement en phase avec cette idée. Il y aura des échecs. Il y a des choses qui ne se passeront pas comme vous l'aviez anticipé. Ensuite, lorsque des individus font un brainstorming, vous allez générer des idées et conserver certaines de ces idées, et puis au final, vous allez mettre en œuvre certaines de ces idées. Alors, une idée, des idées parfois brillantes, vous ressassez l'idée, vous jouez avec. Ne suivez pas toujours complètement votre instinct. Très souvent, notre instinct fonctionne bien et est fiable, mais parfois, il ne l'est pas. Et donc, il faut bien en être conscient. Et je crois qu'il est important pour cela d'utiliser la data, les données, en tout cas les données qui sont disponibles, et pour se fixer les bonnes priorités. Très bien. Écoutez, merci à vous trois. Merci pour ces informations et ces expériences très intéressantes. Je pense que nous avons quelques minutes pour nous tourner vers notre public présent ici à Paris. Y a-t-il des questions? Allez, ne soyez pas timide. Bonjour, une question pour Pierrick. Vous avez dit il faut commencer tôt et ne pas simplement se contenter de mettre une petite touche de science comportementale tout à la fin. Est-ce que vous pouvez développer ce sujet? Parce que ça, c'est quelque chose que j'ai entendu très souvent. On m'a demandé tellement de fois, est-ce que vous pouvez nous mettre une petite touche de science comportementale à la fin? Ben non, c'est trop tard. Alors, je pense que c'est vrai dans les sciences comportementales, mais c'est vrai de manière générale dans l'innovation. Plus vous avez de membres dans une équipe, plus vous avez de gens qui vont vous challenger, plus vous allez avoir de gens qui vont vous dire « mais cette idée, moi je suis pas d'accord, moi j'en ai une meilleure ». Alors, ce qui est important, c'est d'avoir les bonnes personnes au début du projet pour lancer un projet. Comme ça, les personnes qui sont dans l'équipe et qui peuvent participer sont là. Ça, c'est très important. Donc, démarrer avec les bons éléments. Ensuite, lorsque je disais qu'il était important d'intégrer la science comportementale aussi tôt que possible, évidemment, c'est vraiment le cas. Lorsque vous développez une innovation, derrière toute idée, derrière toute innovation, il y a une intention. Pourquoi? Pourquoi cette proposition? Et d'après vous, comment votre consommateur va-t-il réagir à cela? La science comportementale, c'est cela, c'est anticiper comment les clients vont interagir avec vos produits. Si vous ne le faites pas au début, évidemment, vous vous coupez de toute flexibilité technique que vous pourriez avoir après. Plus vous pensez à cela en amont, plus vous allez avoir de la flexibilité pour trouver des alternatives et plus vous allez avoir de bonnes idées qui vont venir de différentes personnes, de différentes parties prenantes. Donc, pour moi, c'est très important. Il faut démarrer dès le début, intégrer le concept et les principes dès le début pour fixer des hypothèses, toujours avoir des alternatives et puis ensuite tester. Tester et tester encore, jusqu'à ce que vous ayez la solution optimale. Voilà. Alors, je crois que nous avons une question ici, s'il vous plaît. Bonjour, autre question pour Pierrick toujours. Est-ce qu'en interne, avec les équipes avec lesquelles vous travaillez, vous rencontrez des barrières, des obstacles pour mettre en œuvre les pratiques de sciences comportementales? Et si oui, comment avez-vous réussi à surmonter ces barrières, ces obstacles? Alors, la réponse est une réponse de Normand. Oui et non. Je dirais d'abord que nous avons la chance, grâce à certaines personnes, grâce à certains experts, de profiter de la vague des sciences comportementales. Je crois qu'on est un peu c'est quelque chose qui est très dans le vent, dans l'air. Et c'est une science qui est extrêmement populaire de nos jours. Donc, je dirais d'abord qu'il y a une audience beaucoup plus large aujourd'hui qu'auparavant. Et comme je l'ai évoqué également, c'est que, d'après moi, les principaux obstacles, c'est le concret. C'est de rendre le concept concret. Pour L'Oréal, nous avons développé un cadre spécifique qui correspond au marché de la beauté. Donc, il a fallu faire énormément d'ajustements, il nous a fallu lire plusieurs articles avant de trouver quelque chose qui était pertinent pour moi. Donc, il y a un véritable espace pour rendre ces principes plus tangibles, plus concrets, plus simples à adopter. On est aussi un peu pionnier en la matière. Donc, il y a beaucoup de très belles choses à faire. Certaines œuvres aussi qui ont été écrites sur le sujet peuvent aider. Donc, et il faut toujours adapter en fonction de la catégorie d'activité dans laquelle vous travaillez. Chaque problématique est différente et dépend vraiment de la catégorie, de votre industrie, que ce soit dans l'industrie alimentaire, que ce soit dans l'industrie de la cosmétique, chaque secteur a ses particularités. Alors, je crois que nous avons des questions ici, à l'écran. Quels sont les compétences et les outils nécessaires pour démarrer une équipe? Quel est un petit peu le kit de lancement? Steve, Piyush, est-ce que vous souhaitez tenter? Vous voulez dire les compétences minimales dont on a besoin? Alors, je crois qu'on peut répondre à cette question de deux manières. D'abord, il y a le partage de connaissances et la formation pour inspirer ceux qui ne connaissent pas du tout le sujet. Ça c'est une première chose. Ensuite, en ce qui concerne l'application des sciences comportementales au quotidien, alors les compétences ou les outils plutôt, je pense qu'il faut des outils d'abord qui vous permettent de comprendre comment cela fonctionne. Très souvent, lorsque les gens ont une vision trop étriquée, c'est difficile. Il existe énormément de méthodologies de recherche sur les process, sur les compétences. Si vous êtes dans une expérimentation assez basique, assez simple, vous allez avoir besoin de certaines compétences. Sur un autre projet, vous pourriez avoir besoin de compétences beaucoup plus poussées. Donc, il faut en être conscient. Il faut comprendre les modèles. Et lorsque vous êtes prêt à apprendre et aussi accepter que parfois vous devrez faire appel à des experts, vous pourrez aller beaucoup plus loin. Je parle énormément de domaines, psychologie de l'entreprise, psychologie sociale, vous pouvez aller dans le domaine de l'anthropologie, la gestion du changement. Donc, bien comprendre l'étendue des possibilités, c'est très important, plutôt que d'avoir une vision étriquée ou étroite sur des domaines extrêmement précis uniquement. Donc, et puis la partie mise en œuvre bien entendu concrète au quotidien. À cela, j'aimerais ajouter que instinctivement, on serait tenté de recruter quelqu'un qui a un doctorat en sciences comportementales, mais ce n'est pas ce pourquoi ces gens-là sont formés. Ces gens-là sont formés pour générer de la connaissance et ils le font dans un domaine d'expertise extrêmement limité, dans lequel ils se spécialisent. Donc, ce dont vous avez besoin, c'est, comme on vient de l'entendre, de traduire en pratique d'entreprise des concepts complexes. Alors, c'est une science qui n'est pas simple. Il n'y a pas forcément aujourd'hui de très bonnes formations. Il y a des formations pour débutants, mais rien d'extrêmement poussé à date. Mais voilà, c'est une science en devenir. Je pense que nous allons continuer à travailler sur le sujet. Très bien. Écoutez, merci beaucoup. Merci d'avoir répondu à nos questions et d'avoir participé à cette table ronde. Eric, je vous rends la parole. Oui, merci beaucoup. Celui qui travaille le plus aujourd'hui, c'est peut-être Adrien. Voilà. J'espère qu'il pourra partager, voilà, avec nous ses dessins. Voilà, c'était intéressant d'entendre parler de contexte avant de mettre en place quoi que ce soit. L'idée de tester aussi, d'apprendre, de tester à nouveau avant de continuer. L'idée de vérifier que cela fonctionne véritablement. Nous allons passer, sans plus attendre, à notre session suivante. Oui, nous allons avoir une dernière intervention pour mettre fin à cette session innovation avant de lancer cette session avec Matt Valert. 2 conseils. Lisez bien le Voltage Effect de John List, c'est un très bon bouquin. Et si vous êtes vraiment très motivé, lisez aussi son premier bouquin, The Y-Axis. Et allez visiter le site de HAC22, qui est une très belle source d'informations et de connaissances. Voilà. Allez, sans plus attendre, Matt Valert. Voilà. Avec Emily Boots, qui est l'une de nos championnes chez BVA. C'est Emily qui va lancer cette nouvelle intervention. À tout de suite.
Hi everyone, I am honored to introduce our guest speaker for the closing conversation of the Innovation and New Ideas session at the Human Advantage Conference. Now, Emily Boots, who is head of BVA Data Factory and one of the BVA's group champion for innovation, and myself will be speaking with Matt Wallaert. For almost 20 years, Matt Wallaert has been applying behavioral science to practical problems. Matt has been the first director of behavioral science at Microsoft, a small company. After leaving academia, his career as an executive led from startups to the Fortune 500 and back again, before joining Frog, which is a Capgemini company, as the head of behavioral science, where he focuses on helping organizations build their own applied behavioral science capabilities. And I think you have created something very new in this area while building with the Frog team. In his book, because Matt has also published a book, Start at the End, and other writing, as well as hundreds of talks from the UN, another small organization, to SXSW, Matt details how the cycle of behavioral strategy, insight, design, and impact evaluation can help us build products and services that change behavior. So Matt is clearly the perfect speaker to end our session on innovation. So welcome, Matt. Big thank you for being with us today. We are very excited to have you at the Human Advantage Conference. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super happy to be here.
Hi, Matt. So my first question, not very surprisingly, is about new product design. Why do you think that the typical product design process that we have in place leads kind of constantly to failures? Do you think that, it's something that we could change with behavioral science?
I mean, I have spent the last 20 years of my life in behavioral science, so I have a bias, and I can acknowledge this bias, which is, of course, I think I could change it with behavioral science. I think, it's hard to say where the typical behavioral design or sort of the current product design process falls down, in part because I'm not sure we know what typical means. When I work with companies, it's very surprising to me how different companies are making products. I think if you think of product design in sort of two halves, in terms of, build the right thing and build the thing right. I think we've made a lot of progress on the build the thing right side. We know more about technical product management than probably we ever have. We're very good at producing things. We know how to get engineers to do things in an efficient way. Like, we're good at making things. We have good testing facilities for doing things like usability, et cetera. Where I think we're falling down is the build the right thing side. A lot of what we decide to build is unfortunately just the idea of an executive who decides that that's the right answer. and with very little evidence says, this is what we're going to do, right? Unfortunately, those executives are often older, often male, often white, right? And those decisions are made relatively in isolation, right? They're making the decision based on inputs rather than sort of, a collective decision-making process. And so I think that leads to, a bunch of products that are made by or ideated by a group of people who are wealthy and white and male and older. And, when that hits the market, who's not all wealthy and older and white and male and an executive in a company, there's some failures there.
Yeah, I guess that's why it explains also that massive advertising campaigns are not really helping.
Yeah, if you make a terrible cake, you can put all the icing you want on it, but the cake is still terrible.
So I've read your book, great book, by the way. So you came up with a new process that's called IDP, Intervention Design Process. Can you tell us about that? Can you tell us what are the steps and what actually behavioral science brings to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think, to be clear, I have articulated a model for doing this. I think there's lots of models. I think we need more models. I think a plurality of models is good. I think what should unite all models is at the basis of behavioral science, right? Behavior is an outcome, science is a process. So we have to start from a place where we are articulating the behaviors that we want to create in the world at the end, right? The book is called Start at the End for a reason. We have to know where we want to arrive in an observable way. I talk to CEOs all the time who are like, I want people to love my product. I'm like, cool, what does that mean? Love can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Do you mean use the product, buy the product, recommend the product? All of those are different behaviors. What is it that you mean by that? So it's that articulation of behavior and then using a scientific method to do that. So at least in my process, we do that in 4 steps, right? We talk about strategy, right? And this is sort of that part where we work with stakeholders and business executives and other folks to understand what is it we actually want to do in the world. We use something called a behavioral statement. It's a pre-formatted statement when a target audience who has some limitations and a motivation wants to behavior, they will behavior as measured by data, right? So it's got a motivation and a behavior. It's a very precise articulation of the world as we want it to exist in the world. Now, it seems people often look at this template and are like, I can fill that out in a snap. I don't think it's that easy. I actually think it's the hardest step in the whole process, is articulating what do we physically, literally want people to do? Data, which I know is your realm these days, is a really great example of that, right? We're like, we want people to make data-driven decisions. Cool, what does that mean, right? How would I even know that it happened? How would I measure it? How would I observe it? Who is doing it? Like when I say I want people to do it, who am I talking about, right? Why would they want to do that? What are the limitations to them doing that? So getting into that really precise articulation of strategy, I think is a big first step. Then we need to draw insights, right? I actually think science fiction is a lovely analogy for this, right? We have to imagine the world we want, and then we have to observe the world we have, right? We want to do that through quantitative and qualitative science, right? What we might think of as data science and user research. So we can understand the distance between these two worlds and why that distance exists. Then in the third step, we need to go into some kind of design process, right? So we need to understand, well, if these are the insights that we have, how are we going to use them to bridge the distance between the two? And our insights take a really specific format. One, why would anyone want to live in this alternative world? Why is that a better world than the world that we have today? And 2, given that it's an attractive world, why don't we already live there? We talk about those as promoting pressures, things that make a behavior more likely, and inhibiting pressures, things that make a behavior less likely. So when we're designing, we don't actually design to change behavior. I can't pop open Eric's brain and find the love my product button and press it and magically it happens, right? That's not how science works. Instead, I modify the pressures in Eric's environment that then change his behavior. So it's changing pressures to change behavior. So we design for pressure change, and then we have to run a pilot. The hallmark of any good scientific process is experimentation. We need to try things at a variety of scales to gather the evidence we need to scale them. Many, many companies either don't run pilots at all or rush to very large pilots with very little evidence that those will work. And we end up in long 6-month cycles, wasting tens of millions of dollars on things that we ultimately are not going to launch. And so it's that small iterative process of piloting that we have to get good at as an industry. So for me, that's the 4 steps. It's behavior as an outcome, science as a process, using strategy, insights, design, and then some sort of experimentation or impact evaluation.
Yeah, and so you just mentioned Start at the End, and Start at the End is the name of the book, so it's really your main focus and your main point. Can you tell us a bit more about what you mean by that? And can you also maybe explain why you believe that putting behavior change first is really critical?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have a rush to solutioning. It is built into the modern business process that what is valued is the ideas for interventions, what we're actually going to do. But let's say that Eric is, the head of a seating company, and he says to me, Matt, he comes to Frog and he says, I want you to design a new chair. What he really means is that he wants to design something that will cause people to sit. And that seems like, well, Matt, okay, that's kind of a pedantic difference. But when we say, hey, I want to design something that causes people to sit, maybe it's not a chair. Maybe it's a beanbag. Maybe it's a bench. Maybe it's a yoga ball. Maybe it's a pair of anti-gravity pants where you just sort of lean back and make a sitting motion, right? When we start at the end, what we want, you actually can get to a wider range of solutions that are more inclusive, more interesting, more accessible, right? And that's why we need that end focus on a very specific behavior. What is it I actually physically, literally want people to do in the world, so that I then can come back to a set of solutions that are, I think, more diverse and more interesting. A lot of what we do when we start, other academics in the conference might have talked about anchoring bias, right? If I say, if I start you with the number 10, you're going to stay in the realm of 10. If I start you in the number 100, you're going to stay in the realm of 100. By starting at the end with the perfect, sort of in the world, if the world was exactly the way I want, what would be happening? We stretch farther, right? We're not starting from today and iterating forward. We're starting from what we want and iterating backwards. And that's a huge difference, right? Because, yeah, you might not actually achieve your ultimate goal, but you'll get a lot closer than if you started at what we have today.
And do you have, Matt, any example of a company who have followed this idea of starting at the end, focusing on behavior change?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are starting to get a better idea of how to pivot to this. We work with folks at Frog. It's been a fun journey at Frog getting folks to do this. One of the examples that I use in the book pretty consistently is Uber, right? Uber had a very clear articulation and understanding of the world that they wanted to create, which was a world where, sort of the majority of people didn't own cars and instead were taking other forms of transit that were owned by others. And, they have, for better or worse, sort of marched towards that place. Now, it's not an endorsement of Uber, right? Travis is a massive sexist and I hope he loses all of his money. But they did have a very clear articulation and understanding of this is the kind of world that we want to create. We know what it's going to look like when we do it the right way. And they were very dogged in pursuing that with very little modification.
So I have one last question, and it's a bit of a, kind of like selfish question. As, the head of the data factory, I'm very kind of like focused on applying behavioral science and data science together. So I guess, my question is, do you believe that it is a winning strategy for new product design to combine both data science and behavioral science? And if you have any example that you could share with us, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of thoughts on data science. I mean, one of the cardinal sins to me in modern business is that data science and user research often live in different parts of the business and are uncoordinated with each other. As a scientist, I believe in combining quantitative insights, right, things we derive from data, with qualitative insights, things we can observe in the world from people, right? And that's been a hallmark of psychological science for 100 years, right? Much of what we think of as the modern scientific method evolved from people observing the world around them, observational science, and then moving to experimental science, which typically involves data. So I want to see those two brought closer together. I think insights has two really key places, at least in my articulation. One is in the insights phase. They really own that phase, right? They need to tell me what are the promoting and inhibiting pressures that are causing people to act the way that they do today, right? How can we observe the world today to understand why we're not in the ideal world, why we're still stuck here, right? And then two, I need them again in the last step, right? I need them to be able to tell me, do these pilots work? Where work means both something from a data perspective, but it also means something qualitative, right? You can get data that says, yeah, I got everybody to sit down, but they hate me and they hate the product. That's not where we want to go, right? We need that blend of quant and qual. And I think the other mistake that companies make is only engaging them on those two stages, right? I kick them out of the room during the design phase and I kick them out of the room during the business strategy phase. No, they need to be there the whole time. There's important context and there's important diversity of perspective that they bring. one of the companies I think does this fabulously well is one of my former employers, Clover Health, right? So I was chief behavioral officer at Clover Health, and they really invested early on in the company in the ability for everybody at the company to be data literate in a way that they could start to make and understand data-driven decision making, right? So even if they weren't personally analyzing the data, they could understand at a core level the insights that were being given to them. This is really important. So you think about things like one of the projects I worked on there was flu shots, right? And if you asked an executive, well, how valuable do you think it is to the company if we get Eric to get a flu shot? Eric's one of our members. If I get Eric to get a flu shot, how much money do you think that either makes for the company in profit or at least reduces our hospitalization costs? And everybody's estimate was about $10. And when we went and did the work with the actuaries, actually it was a lot closer to $100, right? That's a huge difference, right? Because if I came to you, Emily, and you were the CEO of Clover, and I said, hey, I have an intervention, and for $50, I can get everybody to get a flu shot. Well, if you think flu shots are only worth $10, you're like, Matt, you're fired. That's a terrible idea. You want to spend $50 to make $10? Terrible business idea. But if it's $100, hey, suddenly $50 makes a lot more sense. I think a lot of companies don't understand at a fundamental level their unit economics of behaviors, right? And how much they actually make if they can change a behavior. And I think that's fundamental work that we need increased sort of data and finance knowledge about. And I think actuaries are really exciting places to do that. I think I would love to see a behavioral science informed CFO. I think Amy Hood at Microsoft is a great example of somebody who I think has made great strides for helping Microsoft understand, hey, what is the true value of usage over the true value of sales, right? You've seen that entire organization pivot to a usage-based model instead of a license-based model. I think that was a great victory. So I think there's a lot of really good examples from the market.
Great, I'll keep that in mind. That was very insightful. I think Eric has one last special question for you.
Yeah. Maybe one final question before we move to our next session. In fact, it is the same that I have asked before to journalists in our conversation, and I think it is a very important one for our audience. What is your one piece of advice that you would give to a chief innovation officer who want to start applying behavioral science to their work?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. I'll give a controversial answer because I think it's the role of speakers to push the bounds a little bit. What I would say is stop thinking about behavioral scientists, right, as a singular noun role that you can point to someone and be like, that over there, that's our behavioral scientist. Behavioral science is a process that you use. It is a discipline that you apply. And it's one that can be applied by designers and strategists and data scientists and qualitative researchers and all these different roles. So rather than thinking of it as something that, you hire one of, try to think of it as something that your whole team does, right? It's a set of capabilities and skills that they can learn. Many of your employees don't even know basic experimentation skills. How do you teach those? How do you upskill the people that you have? They're all capable of understanding them. They just haven't been taught that probably since about 8th grade, right? How do you bring back those skills that are useful to them so that they can do that in situ of where they are? So that's my tip. My tip is stop thinking about hiring a behavioral scientist. Maybe you need a behavioral science leader, but start thinking about how you're going to upskill your whole team to a place where they have these skills and are able to engage. Show them this conference, get them involved, have them watch and read and learn the things that they can do.
Yeah, well, I'll just add one more thing. I really like the example in the book about the janitor at Pepsi, at Frito-Lay. And that was about, bringing the culture also to help kind of like embrace the behavioral science culture.
100%. And it turns out that's an apocryphal story. It's not actually how I found out after the creation that's not how Flaming Hot Cheetos came about. But it's still, I'll give a second tip, Eric. I'm gonna horn in and I'll give a second tip, which is fiction, right? We have this gravitation towards non-fictional books, non-fictional stories, things that are true. There's a lot of truth to be had in fiction. Even if that story turns out to be apocryphal, it is still a good demonstration of the world as we want it to exist. One where a janitorial worker can suggest an idea and we have a way to ingest that and we have a way to interact with it and we have a way to help them promote it, right? Even if that's not what happened with Flaming Hot Cheetos, I don't really care, right? What I care about is that is how we want it to happen in your company. So take the lesson from that. Read fiction, right? don't read my book, read fiction books. Fiction helps us imagine these imaginary worlds and how we get there from the world we have. Particularly science fiction does that. So stop thinking about a singular behavioral scientist and read science fiction.
Thanks a lot, Matt. It was a fantastic conversation. Thanks for your insight. It was great to have you at the Human Advantage Conference.